1969 when I woke up in the mud in a farm next to a very pretty girl who had flowers in her hair and was not wearing much more than my shirt, and I was waken up by Jimi Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner. And I immediately realized that even though I was a guitarist, I wasn't going to be a rock star. So I went home and had plan B, and I went to my mother and I said, look, if you don't lend me $200,000 to make a movie, I'm going to be a film director, I'm going to move to California and be a surfer. So she lent me some money, and because the Lord looks after idiots and small children, I wrote and directed a film called The Exterminator, which actually did pretty well and brought in a huge amount of money to me when I was 21 years old. So if I'd been smart, I would have simply taken that money, put it in treasury bills, and gone out to California. But, you know, being stupid, I bought a Ferrari. And the thing that I learned about Ferraris were, I bought a competition Ferrari that had raced in the Targa Florio. It was a 275 GTB. It was the last car I ever sold, the last collector car. I still regret it to this day. But I learned that, you know, Ferraris were wonderfully fast, but the windshield wipers didn't work, they didn't defog, the cooling systems didn't work in New York City traffic. I drove that sucker 65,000 miles in the rain and the snow. And actually on the day the president dropped the speed limit to 55 miles an hour, hoping to be arrested, I drove from Boston to New York and set a world record that still stands. I did it in 2 hours, from 2 in the morning to 4 in the morning, averaging 107 miles an hour. But anyway, I ran out of money at that point, so I said I better write another film. I wrote another script, made some more movies, and every time I made money, I would buy cars. And the things that I loved was, you know, you get stuck when you're a teenager. So when I was 17, the greatest cars in the world were the Le Mans prototypes. And the cool thing about them was they had to have seats, they had to have luggage boxes. They basically had to be cars that you could dream of driving on the road. So this was my crazy dream. So I bought a Can-Am Lola with no windshield and registered at New York DMV. They didn't know what a Lola was, so they didn't realize it didn't have a windshield. And I drove it all over. I remember going to 684 after they built it, before they opened it in the middle of the night. We'd move the barricades and race Panteras up all the whole way and stuff like that. And then I said, okay, I'm gonna make a car that I like. Because, you know, I was tired of buying Ferraris and having bizarre things. I remember I bought a Ferrari Testarossa, and I got the car and it had this big, beautiful owner's manual, and the owner's manual wouldn't fit in the glove box. And I called Ferrari up, I got Montezemolo on the phone. I said, how can you sell a car that the owner's manual doesn't fit in the glove box? What if I want to know what the tire pressure should be? You know, I'm not going to just take this owner's manual and put it on my coffee table. And, you know, he didn't really have much to say. So I decided I better start making my own cars. So I took my Lola and I put a coupe body on it, I put air conditioning in it, I put a Kenwood CD player. You guys probably don't know what CDs are. But, and I drove that car 65,000 miles. And then after about 20 years in the film business, you know, I had done well, and it really was time to retire, because that last year I slept in hotels 260 nights a year, and my kids no longer could come on location with me because they had to go to school. You know, they had grown up. And, you know, a friend of mine, Dino De Laurentiis, said, Jim, when you can get into the parties, you won't want to go. And that's sort of what happened with the film business. I was successful, and I retired for the second time. And then I said, you know what? I want to just keep collecting cars. And one day I got a call from Andrea Pininfarina. And Andrea said, Jim, if you could have any car in the world, what would you want? And I said, well, you know, I'd want to take the latest Ferrari supercar, and I would want to rebuild it completely and make it look like my P34 Daytona-winning Ferrari that I own. And at that time, unbeknownst to me, Andrea, Montezemolo had come into Ferrari. And in fairness to Luca, he loved Formula One. And he wanted to make an homage to Formula One. And the Enzo was an homage to Formula One. And it's a spectacular car designed by a friend of mine, but a lot of people looked at it and said, this is not a Ferrari. It's not curvy and beautiful. I mean, in the past, they used to take a look at Sophia Loren and then they'd shape the fenders. And then, you know, the engineers came in and the wind tunnels and whatnot, and the cars completely changed. So Andrea wanted to show that Pininfarina could make a beautiful car. And he needed a customer with two things. One, of course, a guy who could write a check. And secondly, someone who would literally not give a shit as to what Ferrari would say. Because in those days, everybody thought if you pissed off Ferrari, I don't know what they thought they were going to do to you, but like they'd put you, you know, in the garbage dumps in New Jersey, or they'd never sell you the next car, or whatever. But I was someone who, you know, Andrea knew just wouldn't care about this. So what happened is, I sent him my P34, and I went to Ferrari, and I said, I want to buy the last unsold Enzo. And a Ferrari dealer who happened to have one and was willing to make $1 million, you know, a nice profit on selling it to me, sold it to me. So I shipped it with the plastic on the seats back to Pininfarina, and I went over there with Jesse. And the first thing was fitting us in, because the most annoying thing about many cars is when you sit in them, you can't reach the air conditioning knob. Or something, you know, to find a control, you have to look down. So they scanned our bodies, which was like the first time that people were really doing this. They made us wear these white jumpsuits and put dots all over us, and you know, and then we made some seating box and we designed it. And they said, what do you want? And I said, look guys, I'll be real happy if you take my P34 and put it on the Enzo chassis, and that's what I want to do. In fairness to my son and my daughter, they said, Dad, you got to make something that stands on its own and is more forward thinking. So the design changed, and long dissolve, Luca de Montezemolo found out that I was building this car, and he went completely ripshit. So he flew the helicopter to Cambiano, and Andrea told me he knew that this was the real deal because Luca shut the helicopter off. Normally when he would come, he'd leave the helicopter on, he'd jump out, he'd come into Pininfarina, I like that, I hate this sucks, you know, get back in the helicopter and fly back to Modena. But this time he came in screaming, how could you have done this? You can't make your own Ferrari. This is not a Ferrari, it'll never be badged a Ferrari, we're gonna kill this customer, who is this customer, blah, blah, blah. So finally, then Andrea said to him, Luke, I don't think you understand. This guy doesn't care if it's a Ferrari. He made his own car. We've been doing one-offs for customers for a long time. You don't like it, it's no problem to him. He'll put on a Pininfarina badge. And then Lucas said, I got to see the car. This was in the middle of the night, New York time. This was all opera, because Andrea had already asked me if he could show the car to Luca, and I said, sure, show the car to Luca, what do I care? And they'd already put it on the roof of Pininfarina in the sunlight on a turntable, and they were going to unveil it and show it to Luca. So Andrea says he goes into his office, he has 2 cappuccinos, he pretends to call me on the phone, he comes out, he says, Jim says you can see the car. So Luca goes up yelling and screaming to the roof, and the Pininfarina guys pull the cover off, and Andrea told me it was the only time in his life he saw Luca de Montezemolo stop talking. And Luca looked at the car and said, oh, that's a Ferrari. And so Andrea said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, he made a Ferrari. It can be badged a Ferrari. Put Ferrari badges on it. Let's go out to lunch. So Ferrari P45 by Pininfarina is actually the only official Ferrari that was ever made that the Ferrari company had really very little to do with. They made the underlying Enzo. They didn't make the design. They didn't do the re-engineering. They had nothing to do with it. Long dissolve, I decided, I want to go racing. I want to go to Le Mans, because my heroes were always guys like Carroll Shelby, Jim Hall, Briggs Cunningham, the American privateers who built cars in their garage that went over and rocked Le Mans. And I said, I want to go racing. So I went to the ACO in Le Mans and I said, I want to race. And they said, Jim, what do you want to race? You made a one-off Ferrari. You can't race that. It's not homologated. So then I went to the Nuremberg ring guys and I said, I want to race a version of my car. I'm going to make it a race car, it's going to look like P45? And they said, sure, no problem, come back in a year. Now, they later told me that every year 6 people come to them and say, I want to do this. And I was the only person in history who ever actually showed up a year later. And we unloaded the car, and people looked at it, and we went racing. And we raced at 24 hours in Nürburgring. We finished first in class. I worked with Magnelli Moretti. We made a hybrid system, and then we raced this wonderful company behind you, Porsche and Toyota, who had a hybrid company for the FIA Championship of hybrid cars. And, you know, we won. So we won the FIA Championship that year. And then, you know, in the middle of that, Ferrari called me up and said, Jim, you're trading on our name. No one would let you race except it's a Ferrari, and you're modifying our cars, you're ruining our cars, you can't do this. So on talking to him on the phone, I switched on FaceTime, and I went over to the nose of the car, and I took a screwdriver, and it was videotaped, and I pried off the Ferrari badge, and I took a piece of paper, and I made this badge, which is basically the Statue of Liberty, the font from the Declaration of Independence, and the red, white, and blue. And I scotch taped it to the car. And then I went to the FIA and I said, the car's not a Ferrari, it's an SCG. And they said, okay, fill out the paperwork. I went to the Nürburgring, I said, it's not a Ferrari. And I became a constructor. So the weird thing is, when I won the FIA Championship, Ferrari didn't win it, I won it. And then Luca called me and said, no, we won the championship. And I said, no, Luca, you said I couldn't be a Ferrari. So anyway, then people said to me, Jim, you're taking Ferraris, doesn't mean anything. You know, if you were a real guy, you'd build your own car from the ground up. So that's what we did. We designed this car. This is SCG 003S. Now this is chassis 1. This is a real race car that has raced at the Nürburgring 3 times, has finished first in class 3 times, has driven 633 on the Nordschleife with 480 horsepower and 165 kilograms of ballast. So you can imagine what it would do if it was unfettered. And after it was raced, we began the long, arduous process of making it road legal. So we modified it, we put in air conditioning, we put in cooling, we put in more compliant suspension. This car is 52,000 kilometers, racing kilometers, and it has 20,000 road miles. It's owned by a customer. And unlike, I would bet, any car in this building, it drove to the auto show. I mean, you can go online and see a picture of me driving on the West Side Highway, driving it up here. We drove it in through the stuff, put it on the stand, and we're going to drive it home. So what we do is we make race cars that you can drive on the road. Now, a lot of people look at this and say, this is an F-16. I can't drive it on the road. I promise you, you can. If you buy one, I'll give you a lesson. We'll keep driving it until you feel comfortable in it. But the thing that we did is, we looked at the rules and said, how can you be smarter than the rules? Now, for example, the minimum height of a fender is this height, but they didn't say you can't sculpt away the bottom to make it more inefficient. The minimum height of the whole car is this fin on the top. We sculpted away. They say you can't see the wheels and the suspension, but they mention from plan, from above. So we cut those things out. You can't see it except from above, you can't see it. And what that does is, it makes the car much more aerodynamic, because the air that flows through the wheel wells is able to vent. And where you want it to vent, this is a big change. In the 60s, where we didn't know much about aerodynamics, you made cars where the air went over the car to the rear wing. But you could generate much more force by using an effect called Bernoulli's effect, which is you take air from a wide passage to a narrow passage, which accelerates it, makes it high pressure. And that's what happens. So the air comes through here, and the fenders in the back narrow it down and accelerate it, and this thing makes ungodly amounts of downforce. This car makes 1,200 kilograms of net downforce at 125 miles an hour. It is mind-boggling to drive it. It makes 4 pounds of downforce for every pound of lift. There is no road car on the planet that is close to it. So if you want an experience of driving basic sports cars that can be raced on the road, that's what we do. Now, unfortunately, this car is so complicated and expensive to make that even though we sell them at $2.3 million, we don't really make much profit from it. I mean, now people say that's insane, you gotta make profit from it. But you look at this thing and you say, how much money does it cost to get here? This costs so far, you know, just under $30 million to get to this point where so far we've built and sold 6 cars. We just, in the last couple of days, sold some more. And we're gonna cap it at 25 cars, really cap it at 25 cars, not like Ferrari does when they say they're gonna make 400 Enzos and they make 900. We're gonna cap it at 25. And we are also making a less expensive version that's going to start at about $460,000, and it's like the old McLaren F1. It's a 3-seater, so it's central driving, 2 further back passenger seats. It's powered by we have an arrangement with General Motors with their LT5 motor, so it can have 840 horsepower, and it's a real cool looking thing, and we'll be there with that. And the other thing is I own the original Steve McQueen Baja Boot, which is, I think, personally the coolest vehicle on the planet. It won the Baja with Steve McQueen driving it, and we're going to make a road legal version of that. And that's what we are. We're SCG. We build race cars for the road. We're a small company.
And we're racing the Baja this year.
Yeah, we're racing the Baja 1000 this year, and we're in Sleepy Hollow, New York. We do our engineering in Turin, Italy, and we have another factory. We just bought an old LMP1 race car team building at the Danbury Airport, where we're going to move our factory to. And if you have a lot of money and want to fly in, you can fly right and park in a parking lot, or you can take the bus up there, depending on whatever. And anyway, and we'll answer any questions, or my son will, but that's who we are and that's what we do.